Yeah, I'm Jim Tucker, Finance Department here in headquarters.
Mia Mulrennan, Chief Talent Officer.
Is that all we get to know about you guys? Just your title?
I haven't talked about my background yet. I don't know.
Money guy, people guy, first people girl win.
Larry Kessler, again, our business development functions, try to bring revenue into the company.
There you go.
Eric Curry, EVP of Customer Experience and Sales, also try to bring money into the company.
A lot of people bringing money into the company.
Might need a few more.
I'm Zubair Irani, and I've been here a little over a year now, and so I'm kind of generally accountable for everything that's going on around here.
My first, really my first experience being a manager was I was a lead agent for Delta on the ACON course in Atlanta back longer than I care to remember ago. And I think the interesting thing for me was that I had, I really only had a couple of managers in my period of time before I actually came one myself. And so I didn't have nearly as good of a bank of goods and bads, because I think you can learn just as much or more from a bad manager as you can a good one. Because there's a lot of things you can say, wouldn't do that, put that in my memory bank, and that's how I want to be treated, that's how I like to be treated. But it was an interesting situation for me because I had worked with all those people. So I had been an agent with all of them, and then all of a sudden the lead position came open and I got promoted to lead. So it was all of a sudden you went from one day being the guy that went out and drank with them, and you went to the happy hours and the airline happy hours and all that stuff, to probably still doing that. And so I probably stayed too close to a lot of them. And so I would think that was something that I learned over the course of time. But that was my experience, and it was a rather rude awakening, because there was some points you had to do some things that you weren't and have conversations that you weren't real comfortable having, and nobody was around to show you how to do those. So you kind of had to learn how to do them yourself, and so that was my first experience. Larry?
Good afternoon, everybody. Glad you're here. Glad we were able to schedule a follow-up makeup session for you guys to participate in this training. I hope it's been going well so far. I hope that the afternoon is good as well. This doesn't really that much look like a group of neophyte, new first-time managers. Some of you have managed for a little while, and so. But I think it's great to have a chance to interact with you and get your questions. I started my first opportunity to be a manager of people was just about 30 years ago. I'm celebrating my manager anniversary. But my first airline job was at Continental Airlines. I was in Houston, Texas, and was there for a couple of years in their planning department, and got the opportunity to manage a team doing revenue management and managing flight inventory. And it was a pretty small team that built over time. And I really was in sort of what I like to think of as a player coach role, because we were a small enough team that I was kind of hands-on doing a lot of the same work that my team was doing. So I wasn't as much as a full-time, just a manager, but and I'm sure that sounds familiar to a lot of you, that you don't always just manage the work of others, but sometimes you're doing a lot of the work yourself alongside of them. I didn't have the drinking with the gang issues that Eric had.
I've righted my ways now, so
I just might not have been as social. I don't know.
Could have been that.
Or maybe the bars weren't as good in Houston.
They were pretty good in Atlanta, I can tell you that.
What I learned early on, and what I have continued to value. Some of my learnings as a manager that I think are pretty intuitive to a lot of you as well. But that the relationship with people who you work with is important from the standpoint of you know, being human and empathetic and relating in a personal way. I think you know, we're not always the closest of friends and you know, living our lives in tandem, but we do spend an awful lot of time together with our work colleagues, and I think as a leader it's important, and I had that opportunity early on to really, you know, make sure I understood what the issues were in the lives of the people I was working with, and being sensitive to their situation. And I think that's just a healthy part of managing and leading.
You want me to go?
If you don't mind?
Yeah, so my first experience as a leader was rather interesting. So I grew up as a individual contributor, started out at Carlson Marketing Group in their programming area, and so I was a programmer analyst. I'll go back just a little bit further. I never wanted to do computer science. I was a marketing major, and my mom made me do computer science. I still tell her that to this, and thank God she did, because I couldn't find a job in marketing to save my life. But there were a lot of companies that came on site recruiting for computer scientists and programmers, and so I ended up spending the bulk of my career in that space, always with an eye towards the business side, because that's where my passion is. So I ended up consulting after I worked at Carlson for about 8 years at 3M Corporation. I probably learned the most in my career there. They had a fantastic approach to leadership and constant learning and development for their employees. I was actually a contractor, but the leader that I had, which I still to this day claim is the best leader I ever had, completely trusted me and treated me like an employee. I ended up doing my MBA while I was working there. I got RUP certifications. I got into the business intelligence side of things. Just learned a ton. And so I went directly from a consulting role into an executive management role. So I never went through the supervisor, you know, lead supervisor, which I think was a disadvantage for me because I never really had any people management skills, and I was kind of, you know, thrown into this situation more as an advisor kind of role is kind of what I played as a consultant, and so I had to learn very rapidly the human side of leadership. So I was very good about here's what we should do from a vision perspective. I could handle project management. I could do those things. But I really hadn't developed my skills as a people leader. And you know, in hindsight and in retrospect, I think that's probably more important, is to understand how you treat individuals and how do you bring the best out of individuals and how do you grow them to accomplish things that they never thought they could accomplish. And so that's kind of where I started then becoming almost a student of leadership, was through that experience of being an executive leader and not having those skills. Spent a few years there and then ended up at a company called PDI, which is where Mia actually assessed me as a leader. And I think that was probably the only time we really met while at PDI, because she was a consultant for PDI. It was an HR consulting firm, and they focused on leadership assessment and development. And so I got this rich understanding of leadership from the IO psychologists that are educating all these companies across the globe. So I have a really deep understanding of talent management and how you look at talent and how do you source and how do you select. And so through osmosis, even though I was the IT guy over there, I learned all about that at that organization. And from there I went to Hallmark Business Connections, spent almost 6 years with them, and then ended up here, which I'm blessed to be. So that's kind of my history. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you. So the first time I became a manager boss, I told you I started my career in the hotel industry. The first company I worked for was Marriott Corporation. I went to Bethesda, Maryland, where they're headquartered, and went through their HR focused training. And but the first property I was at was the property here on 7th Street in downtown Minneapolis City Center. And I was a one-woman band. The property is not big enough to have an HR department, so I was the one HR person there. Then I was recruited by the Whitney Hotel. Some of you might remember the Whitney Hotel on the banks of the Mississippi River. And I was the one-woman band in HR there, and also became the director of VIP stays. So I had 2 positions at the Whitney Hotel, very small property, it was only 94 rooms. And my job was only project related because whenever we had a VIP stay, remember before I was mentioning binders and manuals, I created the binders and manuals for the process for VIP stays and all the riders and all of that groovy stuff. And then was recruited by the St. Paul Hotel. And I worked at the St. Paul Hotel for many years. And all the while got my bachelor's and then my master's degree at night. I had my bachelor's degree, got that at night too as a working professional. And that was the first time I ever managed people. I was at the St. Paul Hotel, the director of VIP stays, and then was asked to supervise, manage 3 salespeople. And then I became the account executive for 3M Corporation at the St. Paul Hotel. And so that was my first consultant / sales job while managing 3 salespeople. And at that time I was a much better salesperson than I was a supervisor, because 3M became a third of the hotel's business, but I was really struggling to manage the 3 salespeople. I became friends, really connected friends with them, and that made later managing them very tough, very difficult. Started running into performance issues, and so my first supervising a team experience was pretty difficult. Then later I changed roles at the St. Paul Hotel and then went on to graduate school. The only time I was a full-time student in my life was getting my doctorate, and then after that worked for PDI, Korn Ferry. But so I think back on my first boss, manager, supervisor role as being a really tough one. It was really tough, and looking back, I made it really tough on myself.
You made mistakes.
I wish I had known better. I wish I had known better. So, yeah, lessons learned.
Well, mine's a little different than that. Mine was a series of little tryouts, really. So I was an accountant, served my time in public accounting, all cube time, and then I went into planning, and I was all cube plan, and I was a planner for Philip Morris for the manufacturing plant in Virginia, which was massive, and it had thousands of people working on there at a shift. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it was during a time where they couldn't make enough cigarettes to keep it going. So it was going.
How the world has changed.
They're probably still the same, but it was the facility itself was running 7 days a week, 3 shifts a day, and it got to the point where the people on the union employees on the floor couldn't make it all 7 days, and the supervision couldn't make it all 7 days, so they would take volunteers. So I got to volunteer, and I thought, what a great opportunity to go out on the floor and be a supervisor for 8 hours at a time. And I did it for 2 years or so, and I would show up at afternoon shifts, night shifts, and I was 28, 29 years old, and I was going to all of a sudden be a supervisor of a group of people that had been there for 30 or 35 years. That they'd been there, they knew exactly what they were going to do for every minute of those 8 hours, and it was almost just built into their muscle memory when to do what. And so they were going to do it right, but I was going to tell them what to do. And so I learned on a series of these shifts what not to do and how not to handle it, and I developed I developed a way of communicating with them where I wasn't just the little smart-ass kid telling them what to do, and I was able to build a rapport with them, and I would try it on a shift, and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't work, but then if I went back the next weekend, I could try something new. So it wasn't a team that I was necessarily working with, but I was working with a group of people that were used to each other, and I had a chance to try something a little bit different and develop those skills as I went through, until eventually I got to become a lead supervisor in another part of the plant, and that was a more full-time role. And I still use that as sort of experimental many times, and saw what I could do well and what I couldn't do well. And hopefully I've not taken the things I didn't do well with me as I've come through the varying industries where I've been.
Thanks, Jim.